So this is another pathogen. We're going to see this commonly throughout the term. Again, we cover the rusts a little later. But rusts are a category of fungi, and they get the name rust because in many of the states that we find them, particularly when they're producing spores, they are an orangish or reddish color similar to iron oxide rust. This rust is Western gall rust, Endochronartium harknesii. And this is a great example of what's called a central stem infection in the gall form. There are two forms to Western gall rust, the round gall or globular gall form, and then there is the stem canker form, sometimes referred to as a hip canker. And it gets the name hip canker because it will cause the stem to flare outward and look like a pair of hips. Western gall rust feeds on the cambium as a parasitic organism, and as it feeds, it eventually causes death. We can see that this portion of the tree here is adding on no new tissue, and the tree is growing, trying to grow around it. The gall is an example of what we call a hypertrophy. And a hypertrophy is an unregulated, uncontrolled growth of cells. And some students rightly say, hey, isn't that what cancer is? And the answer is yes, this is similar to a cancerous growth in a tree or a tumor. The tree moves carbohydrates to the point of infection in an attempt to ward off the attack. Most trees are very successful at living with the gall rust. They do not succumb or die from it directly. On occasion, on particularly what we call off-site plantings, where trees are planted in locales that they are not normally grown in, we can see very high rates of infection. And those very high rates of infection can lead to the death of the tree from the gall rust alone. I've seen it on the Detroit Ranger District of the Willamette National Forest and a couple other places here in Central Oregon. Mostly though, we see that gall rust is a point of misshapen or damaged wood, so there's volume loss there from a volume recovery standpoint. The wood is also saturated with resin, similar to the pitch tubes that are produced to ward off beetle attacks. Gall rust will cause the tree to move copious quantities of resin to this area. Now, a good interesting tip is if you ever find these galls, broken or dead pieces of gall, they're excellent fire starter because they're highly flammable. They can contribute to fire severity. When trees catch fire, the galls will typically burn through. And they can also be a point of wind breakage, and we see that trees that are exposed to high winds will often break where the galls are attached.